My name is Isabella, and at 33 years old, I watched my perfectly constructed marriage shatter in the middle of Terminal 4. I was waiting at the arrivals gate to pick up my father when I spotted my husband passionately kissing a heavily pregnant woman, even though he had sworn to me he was presenting at a high-stakes tech conference in Chicago. I was seconds away from tearing them apart when my father pulled me into the shadows and whispered that a public tantrum would only give away our advantage and that we were going to teach him a lesson he would never forget. Before I dive into exactly how I systematically dismantled my husband's entire life, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. And if you have ever had to outsmart a toxic family who completely underestimated you, be sure to hit that like and subscribe button. This is a story about the danger of poking a sleeping bear. The fluorescent lights of the international airport buzzed above me as I stood clutching a lukewarm vanilla latte. I was watching the sliding glass doors of the international arrivals gate, waiting for my father Harrison to walk through. He was returning from a month-long legal consulting trip in Europe. My husband Bradley was supposed to be 800 miles away in Chicago. He had packed his expensive suits 2 days ago, kissed my forehead, and complained about how exhausting it would be to charm software clients all weekend. I had even ironed his shirts for him. So when I saw a familiar broad-shouldered figure waiting near baggage claim carousel, number 6, my brain refused to process the information. I was wearing the custom navy blazer I bought him for our 3rd anniversary. He was holding 2 cups of coffee, casually checking his phone. I took a step forward, a smile forming on my lips, thinking maybe his conference had wrapped up early and he had flown back to surprise me. I raised my hand to wave, but the greeting died in my throat. A young woman with long blonde extensions waddled up to him. She was visibly, undeniably pregnant, wearing a tight maternity dress that hugged her swollen belly. Bradley handed her one of the coffee cups, his face breaking into a massive, adoring smile. And then right there in the middle of the crowded baggage claim, my husband leaned down, wrapped his free arm around her waist, and kissed her. It was not a friendly peck. It was the kind of deep, intimate kiss you reserve for the person you share a life with. He even reached down and lovingly patted her pregnant stomach. The vanilla latte slipped from my hands. It hit the polished linoleum floor with a sickening splash, sending warm coffee splattering across my shoes. The noise was swallowed by the bustling sounds of the airport, but inside my head, a bomb had just gone off. My vision tunneled. My chest tightened so violently I could barely draw breath. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to march over there to grab that girl by her hair extensions and to scream in Bradley's face until my throat bled. I took a heavy, trembling step forward, my hands curling into fists. Suddenly, a firm grip locked onto my upper arm. I gasped, spinning around to find my father standing right behind me. Harrison was 62, a retired corporate litigator, with a mind sharp enough to slice glass. He had seen the whole thing over my shoulder. His grip on my arm was unyielding, grounding me to the floor as I tried to pull away. "Do not do it, Isabella," my father said, his voice low and steady in my ear. "Do not give them a scene." "But that is Bradley." I choked out, tears of absolute fury burning my eyes. "He is kissing a pregnant woman. He is supposed to be in Chicago." "I know what he is doing," Harrison replied, his eyes narrowing as he watched Bradley guide the pregnant woman toward the exit doors. "And if you go over there screaming like a hysterical wife, he will spin it. He will say you are crazy, he will call security, and you will lose the element of surprise. We do not throw public tantrums, sweetheart. We gather evidence, we build a case, and we destroy them when they are not looking. Now walk with me." I swallowed the bile rising in my throat and let my father steer me behind a thick concrete pillar. We watched as Bradley and his mistress walked out through the sliding glass doors, completely oblivious to the fact that their entire world had just been marked for demolition. My father did not bother going to the baggage carousel to wait for his own luggage. He had a carry-on bag and a rental car reservation. Within 10 minutes, we were sitting in a sleek black sedan pulling out of the airport parking garage. "Keep your eyes on that silver SUV," Harrison instructed, pointing to Bradley's car merging onto the highway ahead of us. "We are going to find out exactly where he is taking her." I sat in the passenger seat, my hands trembling as I pulled my laptop out of my work bag. The car ride was tense, thick, with a suffocating silence that my father finally broke. "I never understood why you put up with his family," Harrison said, his eyes fixed on the road. "I watched you sit at their Sunday dinners and let that arrogant mother of his treat you like dirt. Why do you let Beatrice speak to you the way she does?" "Because I am supposed to be the supportive wife," I muttered, opening my laptop screen. "Beatrice thinks I am just a low-level IT support desk girl. She thinks I reset passwords for a living. She has spent the last 5 years telling everyone at her country club that Bradley settled for a woman with absolutely no ambition. And Bradley lets her say it," Harrison noted, his tone laced with disgust. "Bradley loves it," I replied, my fingers flying across my keyboard. "He loves feeling like the big successful software executive. It feeds his massive ego. Meanwhile, he is constantly begging me to dip into my savings to bail out his brother Cameron. Cameron has opened and bankrupted 3 different restaurants in the last 4 years, and Beatrice always expects Bradley to clean up the financial mess to save her golden boy." "You have been paying for Cameron's failures?" my father asked, his grip tightening on the steering wheel. "Only with the small allowance I keep in our joint account," I said, a cold smile finally touching my lips. "They have absolutely no idea what I actually do for a living." It was true. My in-laws and even my own husband believed I was a corporate drone making $50,000 a year. They had no idea that my little computer hobby was actually an elite private cybersecurity firm that I founded in my late 20s. I specialized in penetrating secure networks for corporate vulnerability testing. I was a digital ghost, and I was very, very good at my job. We followed Bradley's SUV for 45 minutes, leaving the bustling city center behind. The scenery shifted from crowded highways to manicured, tree-lined boulevards. We were driving into an exclusive gated waterfront community. The houses here were not just homes. They were sprawling modern townhouses with private boat slips and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the bay. This was not a neighborhood for a mid-level software sales executive. This was wealth. Real, undeniable wealth. My father parked our sedan a safe distance away, sliding into the shadow of a large weeping willow. We watched as Bradley pulled into the wide paver driveway of a stunning 3-story townhouse. He put the car in park, got out, and jogged around the vehicle. He opened the passenger door and gently helped the pregnant woman down, offering her his hand, with a tenderness that made my stomach churn. He unlocked the solid oak front door with his own key, ushering her inside like they owned the place. He even stopped to pick up a package resting on the welcome mat. I stared at the pristine white door as it closed behind them, shutting me out of this secret life he had built. "Give me 5 minutes," I told my father, reaching into the floorboard for my leather work bag. I pulled out my laptop and booted it up right there in the passenger seat. I connected to my secure, encrypted mobile hotspot. I was not going to wait for a slow public records request or hire a private investigator to dig through paper trails. I tapped directly into the county's raw real estate transaction records, running a targeted search on the exact street address of the waterfront townhouse. The property was listed under a recently formed limited liability company. It was clearly designed as a shell company to mask the true identity of the buyer, shielding them from public searches. But a shell company is only as secure as the digital footprint of the person who registers it, and Bradley had always been sloppy with his digital hygiene. I cross-referenced the registration documents with state banking routing numbers, slicing through basic municipal firewalls that would have taken a standard lawyer weeks to subpoena. My screen flooded with digitized financial documents, mortgage agreements, and wire transfer receipts. I stopped breathing. The blue light of the laptop illuminated the interior of the car, highlighting the sheer magnitude of my husband's betrayal. The numbers on the screen did not just tell a story of infidelity, they told a story of financial slaughter. "What did you find?" Harrison asked, noticing the absolute stillness of my posture. I turned the laptop screen toward him, my hands gripping the edges of the device so tightly my knuckles ached. Bradley did not just rent this place for her. He bought it. He formed a shell company to hide the paper trail, but the down payment came from a massive withdrawal. He used our joint life savings account as collateral to secure the mortgage. He leveraged our entire future to buy this luxury property. Harrison let out a slow, sharp breath, his eyes scanning the documents. He risked your financial safety net to buy a house for his pregnant mistress. But that is not even the worst part, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper. Look at the second signature on the loan agreement. Look at who co-signed the mortgage to push it through the bank's strict approval process, because Bradley did not have the credit score to do it alone. My father leaned closer to the screen, reading the elegant cursive signature digitized on the bottom of the bank contract. Beatrice. I closed my laptop with a definitive snap. The sound echoed in the quiet car. Take me home, Dad, I said, my voice devoid of any warmth or hesitation. I need to get ready for Sunday dinner tomorrow. I have a feeling Beatrice is going to have a lot to say, and I want to be there to hear every single word before I burn her entire world to the ground. 2 days later, I found myself pulling into the sprawling circular driveway of my mother-in-law's suburban estate. The house was a massive brick colonial structure designed to project an image of generational wealth and untouchable status. Perfectly manicured hedges lined the pristine walkway, and a fountain bubbled obnoxiously in the center of the lawn. I parked my sensible sedan behind Beatrice's luxury imported car, taking a deep breath before cutting the engine. I had spent the last 48 hours practically vibrating with rage, barely able to sleep or eat. But as I stepped out of my car, I forced every ounce of that fury down into a tight, dark box, locked deep inside my chest. I had a role to play. I had to be the oblivious, dutiful, and utterly unremarkable wife. When I pushed open the heavy mahogany front door, the scent of expensive roasted lamb and garlic immediately hit me. Beatrice was holding court in the formal living room, sipping from a crystal wine glass while adjusting a massive floral arrangement. She wore a tailored silk blouse and pearl earrings, looking as though she were preparing for a magazine photo shoot rather than a family dinner. When she saw me step into the foyer, her eyes immediately dropped to my modest beige cardigan and simple slacks. She let out a soft, practiced sigh of disappointment that was loud enough for anyone in the room to hear. Isabella, dear, Beatrice said, offering a tight smile that did not reach her cold eyes. You are wearing that outfit again. I suppose comfort is the priority for someone who sits behind a computer desk all day, fixing other people's broken keyboards. I smiled pleasantly, ignoring the familiar sting of her condescension. It is practical, Beatrice, I replied, keeping my voice entirely devoid of emotion. From the plush leather sofa across the room, my brother-in-law Cameron let out a short bark of laughter. Cameron was 36, a year older than Bradley, but he carried himself like a spoiled teenager. He was swirling a glass of expensive scotch, wearing a designer shirt he absolutely could not afford. Cameron was Beatrice's golden boy, a man who believed his culinary genius was constantly misunderstood by the general public. In reality, he was a terrible businessman who had driven 3 separate restaurant concepts straight into bankruptcy. Where is my hardworking son? Beatrice asked, looking past me toward the empty driveway. His flight from Chicago got delayed. I lied smoothly, reciting the exact excuse Bradley had texted me an hour ago. He said he would be coming straight here from the airport. Just the mention of his supposed grueling business trip made my stomach churn. I knew exactly where Bradley was. He was not at an airport terminal waiting out a weather delay. He was likely pulling away from the luxury waterfront townhouse he had bought with my money, kissing his pregnant mistress goodbye. But I kept my face entirely blank walking into the kitchen to help the caterers Beatrice had hired because she refused to actually cook her own Sunday dinners. 20 minutes later, the front door swung open and Bradley made his grand entrance. He performed the role of the exhausted corporate warrior flawlessly. He loosened his expensive silk tie, let out a heavy, dramatic sigh, and dragged his hand through his perfectly styled hair. He dropped his leather overnight bag by the door, looking around the room, as if he carried the weight of the entire world on his shoulders. Beatrice rushed forward to greet him, practically glowing with maternal pride. My brilliant boy, she cooed, kissing his cheek. You work far too hard, Bradley. You are carrying this entire family on your back. Bradley soaked up the praise, offering a weary but heroic smile. It was a tough conference, Mom, he said, shaking his head. Client negotiations took all weekend. I barely slept a wink in that Chicago hotel room. But I closed the deal. He walked over to where I was standing near the dining table and leaned down to kiss my cheek. It took every ounce of physical restraint I possessed not to violently flinch away from him. The faint smell of a sweet, unfamiliar floral perfume clung to his collar. It was Monica's perfume. I smiled up at him, patting his chest, and asked him if he was hungry. He told me he was starving and took his seat at the head of the long mahogany table right across from Cameron. Dinner proceeded with the usual suffocating dynamic. The table was set with heavy silver cutlery and fine china. Beatrice directed the conversation, praising Cameron for his newest visionary restaurant concept while simultaneously applauding Bradley for his relentless corporate grind. I sat quietly cutting my food and speaking only when spoken to. I played the invisible low-level IT worker to perfection, allowing them to revel in their own perceived superiority. As the dessert plates were being cleared, Beatrice's demeanor suddenly shifted. The casual haughtiness vanished, replaced by a sharp businesslike focus. She picked up a silver spoon and tapped it lightly against her crystal wine glass. The sharp clinking sound brought the table to an immediate halt. Bradley sat back in his chair, folding his arms, while Cameron suddenly looked very interested in his napkin. "I have an important family matter to discuss," Beatrice announced, her voice echoing in the large, formal dining room. As you all know, Cameron has found the perfect commercial space in the Arts District for his new fusion bistro. It is a prime location, and the lease needs to be secured by Tuesday. However, the banks are being unreasonably rigid about the initial capital requirements. Beatrice reached down to the floor beside her chair and lifted a thick stack of legal documents bound by a heavy black clip. She placed the stack directly on top of the polished wood table and slid it across the smooth surface. The heavy paperwork came to a stop directly in front of my empty dessert plate. I looked down at the documents and then looked up at my mother-in-law. "What is this?" I asked, keeping my tone mild and curious. "It is a commercial business loan agreement," Beatrice stated, clasping her hands together on the table. $150,000 to guarantee Cameron's restaurant lease and cover the initial renovations. Bradley has already invested so much of his own hard-earned money into this family, and I simply will not allow him to shoulder this particular burden alone. I stared at the thick stack of paper, realizing exactly what was happening. I reached out and flipped open the first page, scanning the bold legal print. It was a high-interest commercial loan listing, Cameron as the primary business owner, but the guarantor signature line at the bottom was entirely blank. They needed a co-signer. They needed a financial fall guy for when Cameron inevitably bankrupted this venture, just like he had all the others. "You want me to sign this?" I asked, looking directly at Beatrice. "I expect you to sign it," Beatrice corrected, her voice hardening into a command. "Let us be completely honest, Isabella. You contribute incredibly little to the legacy and standing of this family. You work a dead-end computer job sitting at a support desk all day. You have no real financial burdens, no children to provide for, and no major investments of your own. Bradley provides the lifestyle you enjoy. Taking on this minor financial risk to support your brother-in-law is, quite frankly, the very least you can do to prove your worth to us." I kept my eyes fixed on her face while my mind raced. The sheer audacity of her demand was breathtaking. She was sitting there wearing her pearls and drinking expensive wine, demanding I take on massive legal debt to fund her favorite son. And she was doing it knowing full well that she had just co-signed a secret mortgage on a luxury waterfront townhouse for Bradley's pregnant mistress. She was helping one son drain my life savings, while simultaneously demanding I sign away my future credit to save her other son. I looked over at Bradley. He was staring at me with a hard, expectant expression, totally, completely aligned with his mother. Cameron offered a pathetic, pleading smile, muttering about how the restaurant was going to be a guaranteed gold mine and how I would get my money back within 6 months. I looked back down at the documents. I noted the predatory interest rate. I noted the personal liability clauses that would allow the bank to seize my personal assets if Cameron defaulted. They did not just want my signature. They wanted to tie a concrete block around my ankles and throw me into the ocean. I placed my hands flat on the table. I slowly pushed the thick stack of legal documents back across the polished mahogany until they rested directly in front of Beatrice's plate. "No," I said. The single syllable dropped into the dining room like a lead weight. The silence that followed was absolute and deafening. Bradley's smug expression instantly vanished, replaced by a look of genuine shock. Cameron dropped his pleading smile and gaped at me, as if I had just spoken to him in a foreign language. Beatrice stared at the documents I had just rejected, her jaw tightening so fiercely I could see the muscles jumping in her cheeks. "Excuse me," Beatrice whispered, her voice dropping to a dangerously low pitch. "I said no, Beatrice," I repeated, my voice remaining perfectly level and completely calm. "I will not be co-signing a $150,000 loan for a high-risk restaurant venture. My credit and my personal finances are not available to fund Cameron's business experiments." Cameron slammed his hand down on the table, rattling the silverware. "Are you kidding me right now, Isabella? I thought we were family. I need this money to secure the lease. If I do not have a guarantor by Tuesday, I lose the building. Then I suggest you look for alternative financing, Cameron," I replied, turning my calm gaze toward him. "Or perhaps your brother can assist you, since he is such a highly successful executive." Bradley's face flushed a deep, angry red, but before he could speak, Beatrice exploded. She stood up from her chair, towering over the table, her pristine image shattering into pure venomous rage. "How dare you?" Beatrice shouted, pointing a trembling manicured finger directly at my face. "How dare you sit at my table, eat my food, and disrespect this family? You are a selfish, small-minded woman with absolutely zero ambition. You bring no prestige, no wealth, and no value to this family. Bradley settled for you. He could have had a woman of status, a woman who understands loyalty and legacy, but instead he got stuck with a cold, ungrateful clerk who refuses to lift a finger to help her own brother-in-law." I sat perfectly still in my chair, absorbing every single vicious word she threw at me. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. I did not defend my career or my worth. I just let her scream, knowing that every insult she hurled at me was built on a foundation of absolute lies. She thought I was a pathetic desk clerk with no power. She had no idea that I held the detonator to her entire life right in the palm of my hand. "You will never be a true part of this family, Isabella." Beatrice continued, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. "You are a burden. You are nothing but a dead weight holding my son back from the life he actually deserves." I looked at Beatrice, letting a long, heavy silence stretch across the dining room once her tirade finally ran out of breath. I looked at Cameron, who was glaring at me with petulant fury. Finally, I looked at Bradley, who was staring at me with a dark, threatening promise in his eyes. "I understand your position perfectly, Beatrice," I said, my voice smooth as glass. "I will leave you all to figure out the financing on your own." I stood up from the table, picking up my purse from the back of my chair. I did not look back as I walked out of the formal dining room, leaving the legal documents sitting untouched on the mahogany table, and leaving the three of them suffocating in their own toxic outrage. I had barely made it halfway across the marble foyer when a hand clamped down hard on my wrist. Bradley spun me around, dragging me through the swinging doors into the massive gourmet kitchen. The caterers had retreated to the patio, leaving us entirely alone in the gleaming stainless steel space. Bradley kicked the door shut behind us, his charming, exhausted husband act vanishing instantly. His face was twisted into a mask of ugly, unfiltered rage. "You are going to march right back into that dining room and apologize to my mother," he hissed, his fingers digging into my arm. "You are going to pick up a pen and sign those commercial loan documents, Isabella. You do not get to embarrass me in front of my family." I looked down at his hand, gripping my wrist, and then up into his furious eyes. "I am not signing anything, Bradley," I said, keeping my voice perfectly calm. "Your brother is a financial liability, and your mother is delusional if she thinks I will leverage my future to fund his inevitable failure." Bradley let out a harsh, mocking laugh, releasing my arm as if touching me was suddenly repulsive. "Your future," he sneered. "What future, Isabella? You sit at a help desk for 8 hours a day, resetting passwords for people who cannot figure out how to use a mouse. You bring home a pathetic $50,000 a year. I am the one who provides for you. I am the one who puts a roof over your head and food on your table. You are nothing without me and my family." I leaned against the granite counter, letting him vent. It was fascinating to watch the man I had married reveal the depth of his contempt. "If you do not walk back in there and fix this," Bradley threatened, leaning in close to my face, "I will divorce you." I will hire the most ruthless, aggressive lawyers in this city, and I will take half of everything you own. I will drain your measly little savings accounts and leave you completely destitute. You will be out on the street begging for your old job back while I move on to a woman who actually understands how to be a supportive wife. He was trying to terrify me. He expected me to crumble into tears to beg him not to leave me to panic at the thought of losing my supposed sole provider, but I felt absolutely no fear. Instead, a profound sense of clarity washed over me. I reached up and gently smoothed the lapel of his expensive suit jacket. I let my fingers brush against his collar, where the faint scent of his pregnant mistress still lingered. I offered him a bright, serene smile. "Well, good luck with that, Bradley," I whispered. I stepped around him, pushed open the heavy kitchen door, and walked straight out of the house. I did not run. I did not look back. I simply walked down the long paved driveway, leaving the toxic atmosphere of Beatrice's estate behind me. The cool evening air hit my face as I reached the end of the street. Parked under the glow of a street lamp was my father's unassuming rental car. Harrison was waiting in the driver's seat, the engine idling quietly. I opened the passenger door and slid inside, letting out a long breath. "How did they take the rejection?" my father asked, putting the car in drive and pulling away from the curb. "Exactly as you predicted," I replied, watching the massive suburban mansions roll past my window. "Beatrice called me a dead weight, and Bradley threatened to divorce me and take half of my assets. He promised to leave me destitute." Harrison let out a deep, rumbling chuckle that filled the car. He reached over to the center console and picked up a thick, sealed manila dossier. He dropped it onto my lap. "Let him try to take half," Harrison said, his eyes sparkling with sharp legal amusement. I broke the seal on the dossier and pulled out the crisp white documents inside. This was my secret weapon. This was the reality I had meticulously hidden from my arrogant husband and his status-obsessed family. The first document was the property deed to the beautiful 4-bedroom home Bradley and I shared. Bradley loved to brag to his friends that he was the master of his castle, paying the mortgage and maintaining the property. He truly believed he owned half of it. He was completely wrong. Before we even got married, Harrison had used his decades of experience as a ruthless corporate litigator to set up an ironclad blind trust. The trust purchased the house entirely in cash. Bradley's name was nowhere on the actual property deed. He had been paying a monthly mortgage to a holding company that I secretly controlled. He did not own a single brick of the house he slept in. The second document in the dossier was even more devastating. It was a finalized corporate contract stamped with official government seals. Bradley thought I was a low-level IT support worker struggling to climb the corporate ladder. He thought my long hours at the computer were spent troubleshooting software glitches for ungrateful managers. He had no idea that I was the founder and sole owner of an elite private cybersecurity firm. I did not fix broken keyboards. I built impenetrable digital fortresses. I employed a team of 30 brilliant hackers who secured the financial data of the largest banks in the country. And this new contract resting in my hands was the crown jewel of my career. My firm had just finalized a $12 million cybersecurity agreement with the Department of Defense. I was not making $50,000 a year. I was a multimillionaire, and my net worth was climbing by the minute. Bradley's entire software sales salary was absolute pocket change compared to what I earned in a single month. "He wants to hire ruthless lawyers to take my money?" I asked, tracing the raised seal on the government contract. "He will have to find it first," Harrison replied smoothly. "And considering your corporate assets are buried behind layers of corporate shielding and offshore accounts that I personally structured, he will drain his own bank accounts just trying to file the discovery motions." I placed the dossier carefully back into my bag. The satisfaction of my secret wealth was intoxicating, but I knew I could not simply sit back and wait for Bradley to file for divorce. He had already proven he was willing to steal from me to fund his double life. I needed to cut off his access immediately. I sat in the passenger seat of my father's rental car, the glow of the laptop screen casting a harsh light over my face. The words on the bank transfer memo burned into my retinas. Monica baby shower and registry. Bradley was not just cheating on me. He was actively trying to fund a lavish celebration for his mistress, using the life savings I had painstakingly built for us. A cold, mechanical calm washed over me. I did not cry. I did not scream. I simply moved my fingers across the keyboard. With a few swift keystrokes, I bypassed the standard banking interface and accessed the deep security protocols I had quietly installed years ago. I highlighted the pending $50,000 wire transfer and hit the override command. A prompt asked for a reason. I typed in unauthorized fraudulent activity and pressed enter. The transfer was instantly canceled. But I did not stop there. I went into the master settings of our joint accounts. I changed the passwords, scrambled the security questions, and revoked all secondary user access. In less than 60 seconds, I had completely locked Bradley out of every single financial asset we shared. He was cut off. He had zero access to checking savings and the emergency funds. My father watched me work, his silence a testament to his approval. When the final confirmation screen flashed green, I closed the laptop. "Take me home, Dad," I said quietly. "I need to be sitting in the living room when he realizes his wallet is just a piece of useless plastic." Harrison nodded and put the car in gear. We drove back to my house in a comfortable, predatory silence. When he dropped me off at the curb, he told me to keep my phone close and to call him the second Bradley left. I promised I would. I walked through my front door and turned on the lights. The house was immaculately clean, completely devoid of the impending explosion. I went to the kitchen, poured myself a tall glass of sparkling water, and sat on the plush living room sofa. I picked up a magazine and waited. I knew Bradley. I knew his temper, his entitlement, and his absolute lack of emotional regulation when he did not get his way. It took exactly 42 minutes. The front door did not just open, it was violently shoved inward, slamming against the drywall with a loud crack. Bradley stormed into the foyer, his face flushed a deep mottled purple. He was breathing heavily, his hands clenched into tight fists at his sides. He marched straight into the living room and glared down at me. I casually turned a page in my magazine, looking up with a perfectly blank expression. "Is something wrong, Bradley?" I asked, keeping my voice light and pleasant. "You seem upset. Did the meeting with your mother run late?" He let out a sound that was half scream, half growl. "Do not play games with me, Isabella," he shouted, pointing a finger at my face. "Fix the bank account right now. Call the fraud department and tell them to unlock my cards." I blinked, feigning complete innocence. "What are you talking about? Is there a problem with your card?" "Do not act stupid," he roared, pacing frantically across the living room rug. I was just at a very exclusive boutique. I was trying to make a vital, incredibly important investment purchase. I had 5 different sales associates helping me, and when I went to the register to pay, my card was declined. "Declined, Isabella. Do you have any idea how humiliating that was?" The manager looked at me like I was a beggar. "They told me the bank flagged the account for massive fraud and locked it down. Call them and fix your stupid mistake right now." I set my magazine down on the coffee table and took a slow sip of my water. "I must apologize, Bradley," I said, projecting a tone of mild concern. "The bank sent me an automated text alert about an hour ago. They noticed a highly suspicious wire transfer attempting to pull $50,000 out of our savings. It must have been a hacker. Obviously, neither of us would try to wire $50,000 to a random private account, so the system automatically flagged it as severe fraud and froze everything to protect us. It is just a routine audit. We should be grateful their security is so tight." Bradley stopped pacing, the color drained from his face, replaced by a sudden stark panic. He realized I had seen the transfer. He realized the bank had stopped it, but his massive ego refused to let him admit fault or apologize. Instead, his panic immediately morphed back into vicious defensive rage. "You call them and authorize that transfer right now," he demanded, stepping closer to the sofa. "That was a legitimate transaction. I was making an investment. You have no right to lock me out of my own money." I looked up at him, my expression hardening just slightly. "I cannot do that, Bradley. The fraud department told me the accounts are locked pending a full federal review. It might take weeks to untangle. I am sure your vital investment can wait until the audit is complete." He stared at me, his chest heaving. He was trapped. He needed that money to appease Monica to buy her whatever luxury baby items she demanded and to fund the lavish lifestyle he had promised her. Without my savings, he was nothing but a mid-level salesman drowning in the secret debt of a waterfront townhouse. The realization that he had absolutely zero access to cash broke whatever thin veneer of control he had left. Fine, he spat, his voice shaking with venom. If you want to be a cold, useless burden, then I am done trying to carry you. He spun around and stormed up the stairs. I heard the heavy thud of his footsteps down the hallway, followed by the violent crash of our bedroom door being thrown open. Drawers were yanked out and slammed shut. Hangers scraped loudly against the closet rod. He was packing. I remained perfectly still on the sofa, listening to him tear the bedroom apart. This was exactly what I wanted. I needed him out of the house. 10 minutes later, Bradley came stomping back down the stairs. He was dragging a large leather suitcase behind him, the wheels bouncing harshly against the wooden steps. He dropped the bag in the foyer and marched back into the living room, standing over me to deliver what he clearly thought would be a devastating final blow. I am leaving you, Isabella, he declared, thrusting his chin out proudly. I am walking out that door and I am not coming back. I have spent years suffocating in this marriage, tied down to a woman who has no career, no ambition, and no passion. You sit at your pathetic computer desk all day, contributing absolutely nothing to my life. You are a cold, careerless burden, and I am sick of pretending otherwise. I did not flinch. I did not cry. I simply looked at him, waiting for him to finish. I have found a real woman, Bradley continued, a cruel, triumphant smile twisting his lips. I have found someone vibrant and beautiful, someone who actually understands how to treat a successful man. And most importantly, she is giving me the one thing you completely failed to provide. She is giving me a family. You could not even do the most basic thing a wife is supposed to do. You are broken, Isabella. And I am moving on to a life where I am actually appreciated. He waited for my reaction. He wanted me to break down. He wanted me to beg him to stay, to promise I would unlock the bank accounts if he would just give me another chance. He needed to feel powerful, to feel like he was the one making the choice to discard me. Instead, I picked up my glass of sparkling water and took another calm, measured sip. I looked him dead in the eye and offered a pleasant, indifferent smile. Okay, I said softly. Safe travels, Bradley. His triumphant smile faltered. He looked confused, then deeply unsettled by my complete lack of emotion, but his pride would not allow him to retreat. He scoffed, shaking his head in feigned disgust. You will be begging me for help when the reality of your pathetic life sets in, he sneered. You will be calling my lawyers, begging for a settlement. But I am going to make sure you get nothing. Enjoy your empty house, Isabella. He turned around, grabbed the handle of his heavy leather suitcase, and stormed out the front door. He slammed it behind him with enough force to rattle the picture frames on the walls. I listened to the sound of his SUV engine roaring to life in the driveway, the tires squealing against the pavement as he sped away toward his pregnant mistress and his secret townhouse. The house fell into a deep, beautiful silence. I was finally entirely alone. I set my glass down on the coffee table and stood up. The mild, oblivious wife persona vanished instantly. I walked to the front door, engaged the deadbolt, and flipped the security latch. I pulled my phone from my pocket and sent a quick text message to my father, letting him know the house was clear and the bait was set. Then I turned my attention to the hallway. I had a lot of work to do, and Bradley had just given me all the uninterrupted time I needed to completely destroy his new life. I walked past the guest bedroom and stepped into my home office. To Bradley and his arrogant family, this room was just a cluttered, unimpressive space where I supposedly fielded angry customer service calls and reset frozen software programs for incompetent executives. I walked over to the heavy built-in bookcase resting against the far wall of the room. Reaching behind a row of thick technical reference manuals, I pressed my thumb against a biometric scanner, completely hidden within the dark wood paneling. A soft, satisfying click echoed in the quiet room. The entire bookcase swung open smoothly on silent motorized hinges. It revealed the secret space I had converted from a large walk-in storage closet into a state-of-the-art climate-controlled server room. This was my actual sanctuary. Floor-to-ceiling server racks hummed with a low, steady vibration, the blue and green indicator lights blinking rapidly in the dark. The ambient temperature was kept at a brisk 65 degrees to prevent the heavy computing hardware from overheating. Multiple high-definition monitors woke up instantly as I took my seat in the ergonomic leather chair. This network was a digital fortress. It was entirely disconnected from the main house router, shielded by military-grade firewalls and routed through a complex series of encrypted offshore proxy servers. I was invisible here. I pulled up my primary command terminal and started a fresh investigation file. The target was Monica. I had her face permanently burned into my memory from the airport baggage claim, but a face was not enough. I needed her digital soul. I started with the property tax records from the waterfront townhouse I had pulled earlier in my father's car. Bradley had used a shell company, but he was financially sloppy. Following the routing numbers from the title company, I extracted the secondary beneficiary listed on the deed's insurance policy. The name popped up on my screen in crisp white text: Monica Collins. I ran Monica Collins through standard open-source intelligence databases. 28 years old, she had a scattering of previous addresses in lower-income neighborhoods, followed by a sudden unexplained jump to luxury apartments in the last 2 years. Her public social media profiles were locked down tight. They were heavily curated to project the image of a wholesome, wealthy, expectant mother. Her feed was endless pastel colors, glowing maternity photos on expensive beaches, and inspirational quotes about new beginnings and true love. It was a perfect, pristine mask designed to look like upper-class respectability. But I did not build a $12 million cybersecurity firm by looking at masks. I launched a proprietary data scraping tool I had personally designed for corporate vulnerability assessments. It bypassed the superficial front-end privacy settings of her social media accounts and targeted the residual metadata hidden deep within the platform's source code. I accessed archived cached versions of her profiles, pulling up posts and tags she thought she had permanently scrubbed from the internet. Then, using a backdoor vulnerability I knew existed in her particular brand of smartphone cloud storage, I intercepted her deleted synchronization packets. People rarely understand that when you delete a photo from your phone, it does not actually disappear, it just loses its directory pathway. It is remarkably easy to retrieve a deleted file if you know exactly which digital trash can to rummage through. The loading bar on my screen reached 100%. A massive cache of supposedly destroyed images, text message logs, and raw location data flooded my monitors. The wholesome high society mother to be vanished instantly. In her place was a reckless, opportunistic grifter. The recovered data showed Monica had spent the last 5 years bouncing between high-end hotel bars and exclusive nightclubs, systematically targeting wealthy married men. But it was a specific password-protected folder of deleted photos from exactly 14 months ago that made my hands freeze completely over the keyboard. I clicked on an image timestamped late last spring and expanded it across my center monitor. The photo was taken inside a dimly lit, overly expensive fusion restaurant. I recognized the horrible, pretentious velvet decor immediately. It was Cameron's second restaurant venture, the one that had spectacularly crashed and burned just 6 months after its grand opening. Monica was standing in the center of the frame, wearing a very tight, revealing cocktail waitress uniform. And standing right behind her with his arms wrapped possessively around her waist, and his face buried in her neck, was Bradley's older brother, Cameron. I clicked through the rest of the recovered gallery, my shock slowly twisting into a sharp, victorious amusement. Photo after photo showed Monica and Cameron together. They were clearly not just coworkers sharing a casual fling. They were highly involved. There were pictures of them drinking expensive champagne in the restaurant's back office, videos of them vacationing at a luxury ski resort, and intimate selfies taken in Cameron's messy downtown apartment. Beatrice's precious, untouchable golden boy had been deeply entangled with the exact same woman who was now heavily pregnant with Bradley's supposed child. I leaned forward, my mind racing, as the pieces of the puzzle began to violently collide. I needed to know exactly when Monica transitioned from one brother to the other. I needed the exact timeline. I opened a new mapping software window and pulled up the raw GPS location metadata from Monica's retrieved phone backups. I cross-referenced her movements with the credit card statements and travel logs I had pulled from Bradley's accounts before I froze them. I brought up a blank spreadsheet and began plotting the data points side by side, creating a digital map of deception. I assigned blue markers for Bradley's location and red markers for Cameron's location. Last August, Bradley told me he was attending a week-long software sales retreat in Miami. My GPS tracking showed his phone pinging at a five-star luxury resort on South Beach. I checked Monica's location data for those exact same dates. She was right there with him, her phone pinging off the very same resort network. That much I expected. But then I looked at the red markers. Just 3 days after Bradley returned home to me from Miami, Cameron took a weekend trip to a boutique hotel downtown, supposedly to meet with potential new restaurant investors. I watched the digital trail unfold on my screen. Monica's location data jumped directly from Bradley's orbit straight into Cameron's. She had checked into that exact same downtown boutique hotel. I stared at the overlapping digital footprints, absolutely mesmerized by the sheer scale of her manipulation. Throughout late summer and early fall, Monica had been bouncing back and forth between the two brothers. She would spend a weekend in an expensive hotel with Bradley entirely funded by my life savings, and then turn around and spend Tuesday and Wednesday nights sleeping at Cameron's apartment. She was actively sleeping with both of them during the exact same time frame, and neither brother seemed to have a clue about the other. I looked at the digital calendar displaying on my right monitor. I calculated the weeks based on the size of Monica's pregnant belly I had just seen at the airport baggage claim. She was roughly 7 months along. The conception window landed perfectly in the middle of October. I zoomed in on the data map for the month of October. It was the exact month where the red and blue markers overlapped the most. She had seen both men multiple times in the span of a single week. I leaned back in my ergonomic leather chair, letting out a sharp, breathless laugh that echoed loudly in the quiet, humming server room. The biological timeline was an absolute, undeniable mess. Bradley was throwing away his entire marriage. He was violently destroying his own life, draining his bank accounts, committing financial fraud, and alienating his wife to buy a luxury waterfront townhouse for a baby that he firmly believed was his ultimate fresh start. He thought he was building a new legacy with a woman who truly appreciated him. But the cold, hard data on my screens did not lie. It was a complete coin toss. And given how incredibly gullible and completely oblivious Bradley was, the baby he was currently destroying his entire existence to support likely belonged to his own brother. I stared at the flashing screens, a dangerous smile spreading across my face. Bradley wanted to play dirty, but he had no idea he was playing a game I had already won. I walked straight back to my hidden server room, the adrenaline of the confrontation settling into a sharp, crystalline focus. Bradley had stormed out, believing his cruel parting words had left me devastated. He truly thought his absence would bring me to my knees. He expected me to spend the night sobbing into a pillow, terrified of facing the world without his supposed financial support. Instead, I settled into my ergonomic leather chair, surrounded by the comforting hum of my server racks, and went to work. Over the next 48 hours, I monitored his frantic digital footprint. By cutting off his access to our joint accounts, I had essentially severed his oxygen supply. I watched through my financial tracking software as his life rapidly imploded. He tried to buy coffee the next morning, his card was declined. He attempted to book a luxury weekend getaway for Monica, likely to soothe her anxiety over his sudden lack of funds. The transaction was blocked. I even watched him try to apply for 3 different high-interest payday loans online. But without my pristine credit score and substantial income to anchor his applications, the automated banking systems rejected him instantly. The luxury waterfront townhouse he had purchased had a massive mortgage payment due in less than a month, and he had absolutely zero liquidity. He was drowning. I knew my husband better than he knew himself. Bradley was a software sales executive who survived entirely on commission and ego. Without liquid cash to appease Monica and maintain his facade of wealth, he needed a massive, unprecedented victory at his tech firm. He needed a promotion, a staggering bonus, or a golden ticket to keep his pathetic house of cards from collapsing. I knew exactly what he would do because his arrogance made him utterly predictable. He firmly believed I was a low-level database manager handling small-time client lists and customer service tickets. In his desperate, panicked mind, my home office computer held a goldmine of raw, untreated corporate contacts. He planned to steal my client database and sell it to his own company as proprietary leads, hoping to save his career and his bank account in one swift move. I did not wait for him to formulate his pathetic plan. I spent the remainder of the weekend building a trap so flawless he would never see the steel bars closing around him. In the elite cybersecurity world, we call it a honeypot. It is a decoy system intricately designed to look incredibly valuable to a malicious hacker while secretly monitoring, isolating, and tracking their every move. I created a fake database directory and placed it right on the center of the desktop on my dummy work computer located in the visible, unassuming home office. I titled the folder Active Client Acquisition Leads and marked it with a low-level password protection, just enough security to make him believe the contents were highly valuable but weak enough for him to easily bypass. It was irresistible bait specifically tailored to his greed. Inside that folder, I generated over 10,000 highly convincing dummy corporate profiles. I populated the spreadsheets with realistic names, direct contact numbers, fake software pain points, and lucrative budget projections. It was everything a desperate software salesman would need to walk into a boardroom and secure a massive promotion. But the data was just the wrapping paper. The actual payload was buried deep within the file architecture, hidden beneath layers of encrypted code. Because my firm had just finalized a $12 million contract with the Department of Defense, I had access to specific classified digital protocols. I wove federal digital watermarks directly into the source code of the fake database. I attached silent tracking beacons and autonomous reporting scripts to the hidden metadata. The files were rigged with a geofencing alarm. The moment those specific files were opened on an unauthorized external network outside of my home, the beacons would automatically broadcast a silent distress signal directly to federal cybersecurity authorities. It would instantly flag the user for the possession and distribution of stolen classified government data. 2 days later, I was sitting in a quiet corner booth of an upscale downtown coffee shop with my father. Harrison and I were drinking espresso and reviewing the final drafts of my offshore asset protection documents, ensuring that when the divorce proceedings began, Bradley would not be able to locate a single dime of my actual wealth. I was just taking a sip of my coffee when my phone vibrated violently against the marble table. It was not a standard text message or a phone call. It was a high-priority push notification from my home security mainframe. I tapped the notification and opened my custom encrypted surveillance app. A grid of high-definition hidden camera feeds instantly filled my screen. Harrison leaned forward, setting his pen down on the table. "Is it him?" my father asked, his voice dropping low. I nodded, keeping my eyes glued to the live feed from my front hallway. Bradley had not bothered to ring the doorbell or knock. He was using a spare physical brass key. He must have secretly copied months ago, completely bypassing the smart locks he thought I solely relied on. He crept into the foyer, pushing the door open silently. He was wearing dark sunglasses and a baseball cap pulled low over his forehead, acting as if a flimsy disguise would somehow hide his identity from his own wife in his own house. He looked exactly like a petty thief. He moved quickly and quietly, bypassing the living room and heading straight down the hall toward my home office. "What is he doing?" Harrison asked, watching the screen intently as Bradley slipped into the room and closed the office door behind him. "He is looking for a lifeline," I replied, tapping a command on my phone to expand the office camera feed. "He is completely broke, Dad. He knows he cannot access our bank accounts, so he has come to steal my client database. He plans to sell it to his employer to look like a hero. He thinks he is about to secure a massive promotion." Harrison watched the screen, his eyes narrowing into a sharp, calculating squint. "That is corporate espionage, Isabella. I can call the local precinct right now. We can have him arrested for breaking and entering an attempted theft. He would be in handcuffs in the back of a squad car before he even makes it back to his own vehicle." I shook my head, my eyes fixed on the live surveillance feed. "No," I said softly, taking another sip of my espresso. Local police will just slap him with a minor domestic dispute charge. He will claim he still lives there and was simply retrieving personal files for work. It will be a messy, he said. She said legal argument, and Beatrice will just pay to have him post bail by dinner. I do not want him in a temporary holding cell, Dad. I want him in a federal penitentiary. Let him take the bait. We watched in absolute silence as Bradley sat down in my office chair. He booted up the dummy computer, his fingers tapping impatiently on the desk. He did not even possess the basic technical skills to mask his login attempt or route his connection through a proxy. He simply guessed the weak password I had left for him, opened the main desktop, viewed the folder labeled Active Client Acquisition Leads, and smiled broadly. Even through the grainy surveillance feed, I could see the absolute arrogant triumph washing over his face. He thought he had completely outsmarted me. He thought he was walking away with the keys to the kingdom. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a sleek silver flash drive, and jammed it into the computer USB port. The screen on my phone displayed a secondary red alert, confirming that an external storage device had been connected to the honeypot terminal. I watched the progress bar replicate on my own administrative dashboard on my phone. 10%, 50%, 90%, download complete. He safely ejected the flash drive and slipped it back into his pocket. He stood up from the desk, smoothing his jacket and looking around the room with an expression of pure, unadulterated contempt. He had absolutely no idea that he had just slipped a digital grenade into his pocket. The trap was set perfectly, and he had walked right into it, eagerly locking the cage from the inside. My phone buzzed on the coffee shop table before he even pulled out of the neighborhood. It was a new voicemail. I tapped the screen and put it on speaker so my father could hear. Bradley's voice filled the space between us, dripping with absolute arrogance. Isabella, he began, a cruel laugh punctuating his words. I just wanted to leave you a quick message to let you know that you played your hand terribly. You thought cutting off the bank accounts would ruin me, but you are naive. I am about to walk into a meeting that will make me a millionaire. I am securing a promotion that will put me in a tax bracket you cannot comprehend. I hope you enjoy your empty house, because when my lawyers are done with you, you will be begging me for alimony just to afford groceries. Do not bother calling me back. Harrison took a slow sip of his espresso, shaking his head in mild disbelief. He really is spectacular at digging his own grave, my father murmured. I deleted the voicemail and smiled. I did not feel a single ounce of pity for the man I had married. He wanted to play a high-stakes game of corporate sabotage against a woman he believed was entirely defenseless. He was about to learn a very painful lesson about underestimating the quiet people in the room. The next morning, I was back in my climate-controlled server room. My father sat in the corner reading a legal brief while I monitored the digital tripwires I had laid out for my husband. At exactly 9 in the morning, my central monitor flashed bright yellow. The tracking beacon embedded within the fake database had just been activated. Bradley had plugged the flash drive into a new terminal. The tracking software instantly identified the IP address and network architecture. He was not just using a personal laptop. He had plugged the infected drive directly into the primary presentation computer located in the executive boardroom of his software sales firm. By doing so, he had inadvertently connected my honeypot payload to his entire corporate mainframe. It was a catastrophic security error on his part, but exactly what I had anticipated, because my payload contained advanced remote access tools. A new window opened on my screen, automatically hijacking the built-in webcam and microphone of the boardroom computer. The live audio and video feed flooded into my server room, giving my father and me a front-row seat to Bradley's grand performance. I adjusted the volume on my speakers and leaned back in my chair. The boardroom was expansive, featuring a long glass table surrounded by high-backed executive chairs. Bradley was standing at the head of the table, adjusting his tie and projecting total unearned confidence. Sitting around the table were the senior partners of his firm, including the chief executive officer, a stern-looking man named Richard, and the vice president of sales named Gregory. Gentlemen, Bradley announced, pacing slowly in front of the projection screen. For the past 6 months, I have been quietly developing a revolutionary lead generation strategy. We have been struggling to break into the elite financial sector, and our competitors have been beating us to the punch. But today, That changes completely. He paused for dramatic effect, resting his hands on the glass table. I have acquired a proprietary high-level database of untreated corporate contacts. These are not cold leads. These are fully vetted direct lines to the key decision-makers at over 10,000 vulnerable financial institutions. This list contains their internal software pain points, their contract expiration dates, and exact budget projections. Richard, the CEO, raised an eyebrow, looking mildly impressed. That is a bold claim, Bradley. Where exactly did you acquire this proprietary database? Our intelligence division has spent millions trying to compile exactly that kind of information, and they have come up empty-handed. Bradley offered a slick, practiced smile, completely unfazed by the questioning. Let us just say, I utilized my personal network to leverage an exclusive opportunity. With this data, we will completely dominate the market. I can guarantee a 30% increase in our quarterly sales revenue. In exchange, I expect we can formalize my promotion to Senior Vice President of Sales, along with the executive bonus package we discussed last month. Gregory, the Vice President, leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. Let us see the data before we start discussing executive promotions and restructuring the entire sales department. Show us what you have, Bradley. Bradley nodded, his chest puffed out with arrogant pride. Absolutely, gentlemen. Prepare to be amazed. He turned to the presentation computer. He navigated to the silver flash drive he had inserted just moments ago. He found the folder labeled Active Client Acquisition Leads. He double-clicked the folder with a sharp, decisive tap of his index finger. On my end, I watched the execution script trigger perfectly. The spreadsheet opened on the massive projection screen in the boardroom, displaying thousands of perfectly formatted rows and columns. The executives leaned forward in their chairs, scanning the incredibly detailed dummy profiles I had fabricated. They saw names, phone numbers, corporate email addresses, and massive budget figures. For exactly 5 seconds, Bradley was the undisputed king of the room. He looked at the executives, basking in their silent, impressed approval. Then the silent trigger within the metadata hit the corporate network firewall. The spreadsheet on this projection screen suddenly violently glitched. The neat rows of data shattered into a cascade of distorted pixels. The screen flashed bright white and then completely scrambled. Bradley frowned, clicking his mouse rapidly, trying to stabilize the image. Just a minor formatting issue, he stammered, a bead of sweat breaking out on his forehead. Give me 1 second, gentlemen. The display resolution must be acting up again. But the system was no longer responding to his commands. The payload had officially detonated. The mouse cursor froze dead in the center of the screen. The keyboard became entirely unresponsive. Bradley tapped the keys harder, a note of genuine panic entering his movements. The projection screen went completely black. A loud, piercing alarm tone erupted from the computer speakers, echoing harshly off the glass walls of the boardroom. The sound was deafening, a high-pitched mechanical screech that signaled a catastrophic system failure. The executives jumped in their seats, covering their ears and shouting over the noise. Then a solid, bright red warning banner slammed across the entire display. The exact same red banner simultaneously locked down every single laptop, tablet, and mobile device connected to the company's internal network. Every executive in the room stared down at their frozen devices in complete bewilderment. The text on the screen was large, bold, and unmistakable. It read, "Unauthorized access of classified government assets. Department of Defense Level 4 security breach detected. Immediate federal notification initiated. All network activity has been suspended and logged for investigation." Bradley froze, staring at the red screen in absolute, unadulterated horror. The blood drained from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost in a tailored suit. He frantically mashed the escape key, hitting the computer tower in a desperate bid to shut it down, but the hardware was completely dead. The entire corporate mainframe had been entirely frozen by the defensive script I had embedded in the stolen files. "What the hell did you just plug into our network?" Richard bellowed, standing up so fast his heavy leather chair crashed into the wall behind him. His face was purple with rage. "Turn it off, Bradley. Shut the entire system down right now." "I do not know." Bradley gasped, his hands trembling violently as he backed away from the computer desk. "It is just a client list. I swear to you, Richard. It is just a normal client list. It must be a virus." Someone must have set me up. I watched from my server room, a cold, satisfied smile spreading across my face. Bradley had absolutely no idea what he had just done. He did not realize that the digital watermark embedded in my fake database had just automatically alerted federal cybersecurity authorities to a massive breach of stolen classified defense data. He thought he was stealing a simple spreadsheet to get a promotion, but in reality, he had just triggered a federal investigation that would end his career, his freedom, and his entire life. The best part was that he had done it to himself right in front of the most powerful witnesses possible. The fallout in the boardroom was swift but shrouded in corporate secrecy. Instead of having Bradley arrested on the spot, the chief executive officer had immediately confiscated all of Bradley's devices and ordered building security to physically escort him off the premises, pending a comprehensive internal and legal review. They did not tell him about the federal warning banner. They did not tell him that government agents were already analyzing the breach. Bradley, being entirely fueled by his own narcissism, convinced himself it was merely a temporary software glitch. He genuinely believed the company was just overreacting to a formatting error, and that by Monday morning they would be begging him to come back and accept his promotion, so entirely unaware of his impending federal doom. Bradley woke up the next morning, put on a tailored pastel blue suit, and prepared to celebrate his fraudulent new life. It was Saturday afternoon, and Beatrice was hosting a lavish over-the-top baby shower for Monica at the city's most exclusive and notoriously snobby country club. I was sitting at my kitchen island sipping herbal tea when my phone began vibrating continuously against the granite countertop. I picked it up and opened my social media feed. Beatrice was live posting the entire event. She was determined to make sure her high society friends saw just how deeply she loved her new family addition. She posted a photo of the grand ballroom decorated with thousands of white and gold balloons, a massive ice sculpture carved into the shape of a baby block, and towering floral arrangements that easily cost more than a down payment on a house. But it was the photos of Monica that truly showcased Beatrice's venom. She posted a picture of herself standing next to Monica, with her arms wrapped tightly around the younger woman. Monica was wearing a tight white maternity gown, cradling her stomach and beaming at the camera. The caption beneath the photo was a deliberate, calculated strike. It read, "Finally celebrating the true daughter-in-law I have always deserved, a woman who understands family values and brings real joy to my son. Blood is thicker than water, and the future has never looked brighter." Beatrice had intentionally tagged my personal public profile in the post. She wanted all of my friends, my neighbors, and any mutual acquaintances to see the notification. She wanted me to be publicly humiliated. She imagined me sitting alone in my empty house, sobbing into a pillow and mourning the loss of my husband and my social standing. She wanted to break my spirit completely. I set my phone down on the counter and smiled. I did not shed a single tear. I did not feel a trace of sorrow. I simply walked upstairs to my master bedroom and opened the doors to my walk-in closet. I had known this baby shower was happening, and I had prepared for it perfectly. I bypassed the sensible cardigans and modest slacks I usually wore around my in-laws. I reached to the very back of the closet and pulled out a garment bag containing a dress I had custom ordered from a designer in Milan. It was a breathtaking floor-length emerald green silk gown. It was architectural, fierce, and fit me like a second skin. It projected absolute untouchable power. I paired the dress with diamond drop earrings and sky-high stiletto heels. I styled my hair in sleek, voluminous waves and applied a bold, dark red lipstick. When I walked downstairs, my father was waiting in the foyer. Harrison was dressed in a bespoke charcoal gray suit tailored to absolute perfection. He wore a silver tie and a vintage Rolex watch. We did not look like victims. We looked like royalty stepping onto a battlefield. "Ready to crash a party?" my father asked, offering me his arm. I looped my arm through his, lifting my chin. "Let us go ruin her day," I replied. The Oak Ridge Country Club was a massive, sprawling estate built on generational wealth and stringent membership requirements. We pulled up to the grand entrance in my father's luxury sedan and handed the keys to the valet. We walked through the towering glass doors and down the opulent marble hallway leading toward the main ballroom. I could hear the sounds of light classical music and the obnoxious overlapping chatter of wealthy suburbanites echoing down the corridor. We reached the heavy double mahogany doors of the ballroom. I did not bother knocking or waiting for an usher. I placed my hands flat against the polished wood and pushed the doors wide open. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. The heavy doors swung outward with a solid thud against the wall stoppers. My father and I stepped over the threshold and walked right into the center of the room. I stood tall, the emerald silk of my dress catching the light from the massive crystal chandeliers above us. The lively chatter died almost immediately. The clinking of champagne glasses stopped. The string quartet playing in the corner faltered and slowly ground to an awkward halt. One by one, every single high society guest in the room turned to stare at us. Over 100 pairs of eyes locked onto me. They recognized me from Beatrice's cruel social media posts. They expected a broken, weeping woman. Instead, they were looking at a woman who commanded the entire room without saying a single word. Across the ballroom, standing near an extravagant, multi-tiered cake, was my mother-in-law. Beatrice was holding a glass of sparkling water mid-sentence. When her eyes found mine, the color violently drained from her face, only to be immediately replaced by a furious mottled shade of dark purple. Bradley was standing next to her, his jaw dropping open in pure shock. Cameron was near the bar staring at me with his mouth hanging ajar. And Monica, seated in a plush velvet chair meant to look like a throne, shifted uncomfortably, gripping the armrests. Beatrice recovered from her shock and immediately went on the offensive. She slammed her glass down on the table, sending water splashing over the pristine white tablecloth. She marched across the ballroom floor, her heels clicking aggressively against the polished hardwood. "What are you doing here?" Beatrice shrieked, pointing a trembling manicured finger directly at my face. "You were not invited. You have absolutely no right to be here. You are trespassing and you will leave my party this exact second." I offered her a cold, serene smile. "Hello, Beatrice," I said, my voice carrying perfectly through the dead silent ballroom. "It is a lovely party. I saw the invitation you so graciously tagged me in online, and I simply could not miss the opportunity to bring a gift for the happy couple." "I am not playing games with you, Isabella," Beatrice snarled, her chest heaving with rage. She turned away from me and frantically waved her hands toward the entrance. "Security!" she yelled, her voice cracking with hysteria. "Philip, get security in here right now. Remove this woman from the premises immediately." Two large, burly security guards in dark suits immediately stepped into the ballroom from the hallway. They were flanked by Philip, the general manager of the country club, a perpetually nervous-looking man who catered exclusively to the whims of his wealthy members. Philip pointed nervously in our direction, and the guards took a step toward me. I did not flinch. I did not step back. Harrison smoothly unlinked his arm from mine and took 2 confident steps forward, placing himself directly between me and the approaching guards. He held up a single hand, casually halting their advance. "Philip, my father," said his voice, a low, terrifyingly calm baritone that completely cut through Beatrice's hysterical shouting. "I strongly suggest you tell your men to stand down before you make a catastrophic career error." Philip stopped in his tracks, his eyes darting between Beatrice and my father. "Sir, this is a private event," Philip stammered, wiping his brow. "Mrs. Henderson has requested your removal. I must ask you to leave the property." Harrison reached into the breast pocket of his bespoke suit jacket. He pulled out a sleek, solid black metal card and held it up between his index and middle finger. It was an elite platinum holding group membership card. It was a card that only the top fractional percentage of investors in the state possessed. Philip, my father, continued, his tone perfectly polite, but layered with lethal intent. "My name is Harrison Brooks. I am the senior managing partner of the Brooks Holding Corporation. I believe you might recognize that name since my firm legally owns the commercial lease for the entire 300 acres of land that your precious back nine golf course is currently built upon." Philip's face instantly went completely white. He recognized the name immediately. He knew that the man standing in front of him could casually terminate the land lease and bankrupt the entire country club with a single phone call. "Now," Harrison said, slipping the black card back into his pocket, "my daughter and I are here to deliver a gift to the expectant parents. We will not be staying long. If you or your guards attempt to lay a single finger on her or ask us to leave again, I will personally ensure that this club is shut down and you are looking for employment by Monday morning. Do we have an understanding?" Philip swallowed hard, nodding his head so fast he looked like a bobblehead toy. Yes, Mr. Brooks, Philip squeaked, his voice trembling. My deepest apologies, sir. Please enjoy the event. Philip spun around and aggressively waved the security guards out of the room, physically pushing them back into the hallway before practically running away to hide in his office. Harrison turned his back on the retreating manager and stepped back to my side, offering me his arm once again. Beatrice stood completely frozen in the middle of the ballroom floor. Her mouth hung open in absolute shock. Her ultimate high society power move had just been effortlessly swatted away. She had tried to humiliate me by having me thrown out like trash. And instead, her own club manager had just bowed down to my father in front of all her elite snobby friends. Her power, her status, and her control were completely neutralized. I looked at Beatrice, watching her entire worldview fracture. I offered her another perfectly sweet, razor-sharp smile. Now that the welcoming committee is finished, I said, my voice bright and clear, I believe it is time to give Bradley and Monica their present. I stepped around my stunned mother-in-law, leaving her paralyzed in the middle of the room, and began walking directly toward the extravagant gift table where my husband and his mistress were waiting. The sea of wealthy guests parted for me like a retreating tide. My emerald silk gown rustled softly against the polished hardwood floor. But the only sound that truly registered in the dead silent ballroom was the sharp rhythmic clicking of my stiletto heels. Every step was measured. Every breath was calculated. I kept my eyes locked entirely on my husband and the woman sitting beside him. Bradley had positioned himself defensively in front of Monica. He puffed out his chest, attempting to project the image of a strong, protective patriarch guarding his new family. But I knew him too well. I could see a faint tremor in his hands and the rapid pulse beating against his collar. He was terrified. He had just watched my father bend the general manager to his will, and he was suddenly realizing that the meek, submissive wife he thought he had discarded was a complete fabrication. Monica, on the other hand, was playing her role to the hilt. She shrank back into her plush velvet chair, placing both hands protectively over her pregnant stomach. She looked up at me with wide, tear-filled eyes, trying to cast me as the deranged, jealous ex-wife who had come to ruin her magical day. I reached the extravagant gift table. It was piled high with silver-wrapped boxes, designer diaper bags, and towering stacks of expensive imported baby clothes. I stopped just inches away from the table, perfectly invading their personal space. I did not scream. I did not throw a drink in Bradley's face. I simply reached into my structured leather clutch and pulled out a small, beautifully wrapped rectangular box. It was wrapped in heavy matte black paper and tied with a flawless emerald green silk ribbon that matched my gown. I held it out toward Bradley, resting it gently on top of a mountain of pastel tissue paper. Hello, Bradley, I said, my voice warm and melodic, carrying easily through the completely silent room. I could not possibly let this joyous occasion pass without bringing something for the nursery. Before Bradley could even reach for the box, Beatrice arrived at my shoulder. She was breathing heavily, her face flushed with indignation. She grabbed the edge of the gift table, positioning herself between me and her precious son. We do not want your cheap, pathetic gifts here, Beatrice sneered, her voice trembling with barely suppressed rage. This is a celebration of family, a celebration of new life and legacy. You have no part in this. Take your little box and get out before I call the police and have you arrested for trespassing. I turned my head slowly, looking at my mother-in-law. I let my eyes sweep over her trembling posture, taking in her absolute desperation to maintain control. You are going to want him to open this, Beatrice, I replied, my voice dropping to a smooth, chilling register. I promise you it is the most valuable thing on this entire table. It is a gift of absolute truth. And I think a woman so obsessed with family legacy would appreciate knowing exactly what kind of legacy she is celebrating. I turned back to my husband. Open it, Bradley, I insisted, keeping my smile perfectly intact. Open it right now. Let all of your mother's friends see exactly what I brought for you. Bradley looked at the black box, then looked around the room. Over 100 high society guests were watching us with bated breath. Some had even subtly pulled out their smartphones, ready to record the inevitable country club meltdown. Bradley realized he had an audience. His massive, fragile ego simply could not resist the opportunity to play the unbothered superior man in front of his peers. He wanted to prove that I had absolutely no power over him. He let out a loud, mocking scoff and snatched the box off the table. "Fine," Isabella Bradley sneered, holding the box up for the crowd to see. "Let us look at whatever sad, desperate little memory you brought to try and guilt me into coming back to you. You are making a fool of yourself. I told you I was done with you. I am building a real family now." He ripped the emerald ribbon away and tore off the black wrapping paper with an arrogant, dramatic flourish. He popped the lid off the box and pulled out a beautiful custom-bound leather book. The cover was embossed with gold lettering that read "Baby Memory Book." Bradley chuckled, shaking his head in mock pity. "A memory book," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "You brought us a memory book. How pathetic can you possibly be? You failed to give me a child, Isabella. You do not get to participate in the memories of the family I am building with a woman who actually loves me." I did not break eye contact. "Open the cover, Bradley." He smirked, looking down at Monica as if sharing a private joke, and flipped open the heavy leather cover of the book. He expected to find blank pages meant for ultrasound photos and footprint stamps. He expected to find a sappy, desperate letter begging him to remember our past, but there were no blank pages. Glued perfectly to the inside cover of the memory book was a stark official medical document. It was printed on secure watermarked laboratory paper and stamped with the official seal of a premier, highly discreet genetic testing facility. Bradley's smug, arrogant smile completely vanished. The color drained from his face so fast, he looked as though he had been physically struck. His eyes darted frantically across the bold black text on the page, his lips parting in a silent gasp. I took a step forward, raising my voice, so it echoed clearly off the high vaulted ceilings of the ballroom. I wanted every single person in that room to hear my words. I wanted the truth to echo in Beatrice's ears for the rest of her miserable life. "When you abandoned our marriage to fund your double life." I started, my tone ringing with clinical, terrifying precision. "I decided to do a little digital housekeeping. I found the luxury waterfront townhouse you secretly bought using my life savings as collateral. I found the mortgage paperwork your mother secretly co-signed. But I also found your pregnant girlfriend's deleted digital history." Monica let out a sharp, panicked gasp. She tried to stand up, but her legs seemed to give out, and she sank back into the velvet chair, her hands trembling violently over her stomach. "It turns out," I continued, pacing slowly in front of the gift table, "Monica has quite the busy social calendar. I tracked her location data. I pulled her archived hotel bookings. I mapped her movements throughout the entire month of October. It was fascinating to see how she managed her time. She would spend weekends in five-star resorts with you, Bradley, entirely funded by my money. And then she would spend her Tuesday and Wednesday nights sleeping in a downtown boutique hotel with someone else. The ballroom was so quiet I could hear the ice melting in the champagne buckets. I needed to be absolutely sure," I said, projecting my voice toward the crowd. "So 2 weeks ago, I hired a private firm. I had a discreet investigator follow Monica to a little cafe downtown. When she finished her lunch and walked away, my investigator collected the unwashed wine glass she left on her table. We extracted her DNA from the rim of the glass. And since I already had access to your medical files, Bradley, setting up a comparative paternity analysis was incredibly simple." Bradley was shaking now. The heavy leather memory book rattled in his hands. He was staring at a specific line on the page, a line I had purposefully highlighted in neon red ink. "Read the results, Bradley." I commanded, my voice slicing through the heavy, suffocating air of the ballroom. "Read the red text out loud for your mother. Tell her about her family legacy." He could not speak. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. His eyes were wide with a terror so profound it looked almost hollow. "Since my husband seems to have lost his voice, I will share the joyous news with all of you," I announced, turning to face Beatrice and the crowd. "I am sure you are all wondering who the other man was. Who was Monica sleeping with while she was draining my husband's bank accounts?" I turned my gaze toward the bar, locking eyes with the golden boy. Cameron was standing perfectly still, his glass of scotch hovering halfway to his mouth. He looked completely bewildered, having no idea why I was suddenly focusing on him. The DNA results are conclusive, I declared, my voice ringing like a bell. Bradley, you are a 0% match. You are not the father of that child. You threw away your entire marriage, committed massive financial fraud, and destroyed your life to buy a house for a baby that does not belong to you. I pointed a single perfectly manicured finger directly at the bar. The father of Monica's baby is standing right over there. Cameron is a 99.9% match. A collective synchronized gasp rippled through the entire ballroom. Over 100 wealthy, status-obsessed guests simultaneously turned their heads to stare at Cameron. Beatrice let out a strangled, horrifying sound, staggering backward and clutching her chest as if her heart had just stopped beating. I looked back at Bradley, watching the absolute catastrophic reality of my words crash over him. He looked down at the DNA test, then looked up at his brother across the room. I smiled, a genuine, radiant expression of pure victory. "Congratulations on your new niece or nephew, Bradley," I whispered softly, ensuring only he could hear me. "I hope the baby shower was everything you dreamed it would be." Bradley stood paralyzed. The heavy leather memory book slipped from his trembling fingers and hit the polished hardwood floor with a dull thud. The certified DNA results remained clutched in his hand. His chest heaved as he struggled to draw breath into his lungs. He slowly turned his head to look down at Monica. The smug arrogance that had defined his entire existence was completely gone. In its place was the hollow, devastated realization of a man who had just traded a stable, successful marriage for a spectacular, humiliating lie. Monica immediately went into survival mode. She knew her meal ticket was evaporating right in front of her eyes. She let out a loud, theatrical sob, throwing her hands over her face to force out fake tears. "Bradley, please," she wailed, reaching out to grab his tailored suit jacket. "It was a mistake. It meant nothing. He manipulated me. You are the one I love. We are building a family together. Please do not let her ruin this for us." Bradley looked at her grasping hands with absolute revulsion. He violently shoved her away, stepping back as if she were carrying a plague. "Do not touch me," he snarled, his voice cracking with a mixture of grief and sheer, uncontrollable fury. "Do not ever put your hands on me again." He turned his gaze away from the weeping woman and looked across the massive ballroom. Through the sea of stunned, silent guests, his eyes locked directly onto the mahogany bar. Cameron was still standing there, frozen like a statue. The glass of expensive scotch trembled in his hand, splashing amber liquid over the rim and onto his designer shoes. He had spent the last several months watching his younger brother bankrupt himself to support a woman they had both been sleeping with. He had sat back and let Bradley blow up his marriage to Isabella, completely content to keep his mouth shut and let his brother take the financial fall for his own biological child. The golden boy had finally been caught, and he had absolutely nowhere to run. A low, guttural sound erupted from deep within Bradley's chest. It was not a shout or a scream. It was a primal, animalistic roar of pure, unfiltered agony. All the pressure he had been under, the frozen bank accounts, the desperate theft of corporate data, the looming mortgage payments for a secret townhouse, it all snapped at once. He had destroyed his entire life for a child that belonged to the brother his mother always loved more. Bradley charged across the ballroom floor. He moved with a terrifying, reckless speed, shoving high society guests out of his way. Women in expensive dresses shrieked and scrambled backward. Men in tailored suits stumbled out of his path. Cameron dropped his scotch glass and threw his hands up in a desperate attempt to defend himself, but he was entirely too slow. Bradley did not just hit him. He launched his entire body weight forward, tackling his older brother with the force of a freight train. The impact was catastrophic. Cameron flew backward, and the two grown men crashed violently into the extravagant gift table. The heavy wooden table buckled under their combined weight, collapsing entirely. Silver-wrapped boxes, designer diaper bags, and delicate imported baby clothes exploded into the air, scattering across the floor like debris from a bomb blast. But Bradley did not stop there. The momentum carried them right through the wreckage of the gifts and directly into the towering champagne fountain Beatrice had specially ordered for the event. Hundreds of stacked crystal glasses shattered in a spectacular, deafening cascade. Shards of expensive crystal and gallons of sticky vintage champagne rained down on them, soaking their tailored suits and mixing with the blood that was already starting to flow. Cameron scrambled backward, slipping on the wet floor and crashing straight into the massive custom baby shower cake. The towering, multi-tiered confection collapsed, burying Cameron in a landslide of white frosting and gold sponge sugar. Bradley scrambled on top of him, ignoring the broken glass cutting into his own hands and knees. He grabbed Cameron by the collar of his expensive shirt and began throwing blind, vicious punches. "You stole everything from me!" Bradley screamed, his voice hoarse and raw. "You let me throw away my life for your bastard child. You let me pay for her." Cameron tried to block the blows, throwing wild punches back at his younger brother. It was an incredibly ugly, uncoordinated brawl. They were rolling around in frosting champagne and broken crystal, destroying the lavish ballroom and tearing each other to pieces. Across the room, Beatrice finally snapped out of her paralyzed shock. The sight of her two sons destroying each other in front of her elite country club friends was too much to bear. But true to form, her maternal instincts were completely biased. She did not yell for them to stop fighting. She did not run to pull them apart equally. She sprinted across the ruined ballroom floor, her high heels slipping on the spilled champagne. She threw herself toward the brawl, grabbing the back of Bradley's suit jacket and yanking him backward with all her strength. "Get off of him!" Beatrice shrieked, her voice piercing through the chaos. "Leave him alone, Bradley. Stop hurting him. Let him go right now." She was hitting her younger son, scratching at his shoulders and screaming at him to release his grip. Even now, even after finding out that Cameron had slept with his brother's pregnant girlfriend and let him take the financial fall, Beatrice was still fiercely protecting her golden boy. She did not care about Bradley's shattered life or the massive humiliation he had just suffered. She only cared about keeping Cameron safe. Bradley felt his mother pulling him away, and the realization of her favoritism seemed to fuel his rage even further. He shoved his mother back, sending Beatrice stumbling into a chair. "You always pick him," Bradley roared, wiping blood from his split lip. "He ruined my life and you are still trying to protect him." The high society guests, who Beatrice had spent her entire life trying to impress, were not intervening. They were completely mesmerized by the trashy, spectacular violence unfolding in front of them. The ultra-wealthy suburbanites had whipped out their smartphones and were actively recording every single second of the brawl. Camera flashes lit up the ballroom. Whispers and shocked gasps filled the air as the elite socialites eagerly documented the absolute destruction of the Henderson family legacy. Beatrice looked up from the floor and saw the glowing screens of dozens of cell phones pointed directly at her. She saw the judgmental, horrified expressions of the women she played tennis with and the men her husband did business with. She raised her hands, trying to cover her face, as the reality of her social ruin crashed down upon her. She was finished. She would never be able to show her face in this city again without people whispering about the violent, trashy baby shower where her sons beat each other bloody over a shared mistress. The heavy double doors of the ballroom burst open again. A team of 4 burly country club security guards rushed into the room, followed closely by the general manager. They sprinted toward the wreckage of the cake and the champagne tower, grabbing the 2 bleeding, exhausted men and forcefully dragging them apart. Bradley was screaming, fighting against the guards, trying to get one last hit in, while Cameron lay gasping for air on the ruined floor covered in frosting and blood. In the distance, the loud, piercing wail of police sirens began to echo through the country club grounds. Management had called the authorities the moment the physical violence began. While the entire ballroom descended into absolute pandemonium, my father and I had quietly stepped away from the chaos. We had moved to the far end of the room, taking up residence at the long, polished mahogany bar. The bartender, a young man looking completely terrified by the brawl, was staring wide-eyed at the center of the room. Harrison tapped his knuckles lightly against the wooden bar, bringing the young man's attention back to us. "2 glasses of your best vintage champagne." "Please, my father," said his voice, a calm, steady anchor amidst the screaming and the sirens. The bartender nodded rapidly, grabbing a bottle from the top shelf and pouring 2 pristine, bubbling glasses. He set them down in front of us before quickly stepping back to watch the police officers rush into the ballroom with their radios squawking. I picked up my glass and turned my back to the bar, leaning my elbows against the polished wood. I looked out over the ballroom, watching the flashing red and blue lights from the police cruisers reflect off the floor-to-ceiling windows. Officers were placing Bradley in handcuffs to calm him down, while paramedics rushed in to check on Cameron. Beatrice was sobbing hysterically in the corner, trying to hide her face from the relentless glare of her friend's smartphone cameras. Monica was still sitting in her velvet chair, completely ignored by everyone, crying genuine tears, now that she realized she was completely entirely alone. I raised my glass, clinking the delicate crystal against my father's glass. A crisp, clear chime rang out between us. We stood there in our impeccable, custom-tailored clothing, sipping expensive champagne and watching the people who had tried to destroy me completely eradicate their own existence. The air in the room was thick with the scent of ruined sugar, spilled alcohol, an absolute undeniable victory. I took a slow sip of the cold, bubbly champagne, letting the sweet taste linger on my tongue. The show was spectacular, but the final act was still waiting just over the horizon. Bradley stood entirely paralyzed. The heavy leather-bound memory book slipped from his numb fingers, dropping to the polished hardwood floor with a dull, heavy thud. The certified DNA results remained tightly clutched in his trembling hand. He stared at the glowing red text as if the letters were physically burning his retinas. His chest heaved violently as he struggled to draw a single steady breath into his lungs. Slowly, he turned his head to look down at Monica. The smug, untouchable arrogance that had defined his entire existence was completely eradicated. In its place was the hollow, devastated realization of a man who had just traded a stable, successful marriage, a beautiful home, and his entire financial future for a spectacular, humiliating lie. Monica immediately went into desperate survival mode. She knew her meal ticket, her luxury waterfront townhouse, and her lavish lifestyle were evaporating right in front of her eyes. She let out a loud, theatrical sob, throwing her hands over her face to force out a stream of fake, panicked tears. "Bradley, please," she wailed, reaching out to grab the lapel of his tailored suit jacket. "It was a mistake. It meant absolutely nothing to me. He manipulated me when I was vulnerable. You are the one I truly love. We are building a beautiful family together. Please do not let Isabella ruin this perfect life for us." Bradley looked down at her grasping hands with absolute unfiltered revulsion. He violently shoved her away, stepping back as if she were carrying a highly contagious disease. "Do not touch me," he snarled, his voice cracking with a mixture of raw grief and sheer uncontrollable fury. "Do not ever put your hands on me again, you disgusting liar." He turned his gaze away from the weeping woman and looked out across the massive, opulent ballroom. Through the sea of stunned, dead silent guests, his eyes locked directly onto the mahogany bar. Cameron was still standing there, frozen like a deer caught in the headlights. The glass of expensive scotch trembled wildly in his hand, splashing amber liquid over the rim and staining his pristine designer shoes. Cameron had spent the last several months watching his younger brother bankrupt himself to support a woman they had both been actively sleeping with. He had sat back relaxed and let Bradley blow up his entire marriage to me, completely content to keep his mouth shut. He had happily let his brother take the catastrophic financial fall for his own biological child. The golden boy had finally been caught red-handed, and he had absolutely nowhere to run. A low, guttural sound erupted from deep within Bradley's chest. It was not a shout or a scream. It was a primal, animalistic roar of pure, unfiltered agony. All the suffocating pressure he had been under, the frozen bank accounts, the desperate, terrifying theft of corporate data, the looming mortgage payments for a secret townhouse, it all snapped at once. He had systematically destroyed his entire life for a child that belonged to the older brother his mother had always loved more. Bradley charged across the ballroom floor. He moved with a terrifying, reckless speed, shoving high society guests violently out of his way. Wealthy women in expensive silk dresses shrieked and scrambled backward, dropping their clutched purses. Men in tailored suits stumbled clumsily out of his path, knocking over floral arrangements. Cameron dropped his scotch glass, letting it shatter on the floor, and threw his hands up in a desperate, pathetic attempt to defend himself, but he was entirely too slow. Bradley did not just hit him. He launched his entire body weight forward, tackling his older brother with the unstoppable force of a runaway freight train. The impact was catastrophic. Cameron flew backward, and the two grown men crashed violently into the extravagant gift table. The heavy wooden table buckled instantly under their combined weight, collapsing entirely with a loud, crunching snap. Silver-wrapped boxes, designer diaper bags, and delicate imported baby clothes exploded into the air, scattering across the polished floor like debris from a bomb blast. But Bradley did not stop there. The sheer momentum carried them right through the wreckage of the gifts and directly into the towering, spectacular champagne fountain Beatrice had specially ordered for the event. Hundreds of meticulously stacked crystal glasses shattered in a deafening, cascading crash. Shards of expensive, sharp crystal and gallons of sticky vintage champagne rained down on them, soaking their tailored suits and mixing with the dark crimson blood that was already starting to flow from Cameron's nose. Cameron scrambled backwards, slipping wildly on the wet floor and crashing straight into the massive custom-ordered baby shower cake. The towering, multi-tiered confection collapsed, completely burying Cameron in a heavy landslide of white vanilla frosting and gold spun sugar. Bradley scrambled on top of him, ignoring the broken glass viciously cutting into his own hands and knees. He grabbed Cameron by the collar of his expensive silk shirt and began throwing blind, aggressive punches. "You stole everything from me!" Bradley screamed, his voice hoarse and raw, echoing through the cavernous room. "You let me throw away my entire life for your child. You let me pay for her. You let me ruin my marriage for your mistake." Cameron tried to block the heavy blows, throwing wild, uncoordinated punches back at his younger brother. It was an incredibly ugly, violent brawl. They were rolling around in sticky frosting, expensive champagne, and jagged, broken crystal, systematically destroying the lavish ballroom and tearing each other to pieces. Across the room, Beatrice finally snapped out of her paralyzed shock. The sight of her two sons brutally destroying each other in front of her elite country club friends was entirely too much for her fragile ego to bear. But true to form, her maternal instincts were completely biased. She did not yell for them to stop fighting. She did not run over to pull them apart equally to save them both. She sprinted across the ruined ballroom floor, her high heels slipping dangerously on the spilled champagne. She threw herself toward the violent brawl, grabbing the back of Bradley's suit jacket and yanking him backward with all her desperate strength. "Get off of him!" Beatrice shrieked, her voice piercing sharply through the chaos. "Leave him alone, Bradley. Stop hurting him right now. Let him go." She was actively hitting her younger son, scratching aggressively at his shoulders and screaming at him to release his grip on his brother. Even now, even after finding out that Cameron had slept with his brother's pregnant girlfriend and let him take the massive financial fall, Beatrice was still fiercely protecting her golden boy. She did not care about Bradley's shattered life or the massive public humiliation he had just suffered. She only cared about keeping Cameron safe from harm. Bradley felt his mother violently pulling him away, and the immediate realization of her blatant favoritism seemed to fuel his rage even further. He shoved his mother back forcefully, sending Beatrice stumbling backward until she collapsed into a velvet chair. "You always pick him," Bradley roared, wiping a smear of dark blood from his split lip. "He completely ruined my life, and you are still trying to protect him over me." The high society guests, who Beatrice had spent her entire adult life desperately trying to impress, were not intervening. They were completely mesmerized by the trashy, spectacular violence unfolding right in front of them. The ultra-wealthy suburbanites had whipped out their latest smartphones and were actively recording every single second of the brutal brawl. Bright camera flashes lit up the ballroom. Excited whispers and shocked gasps filled the air as the elite socialites eagerly documented the absolute permanent destruction of the Henderson family legacy. Beatrice looked up from the sticky floor and saw the glowing screens of dozens of cell phones pointed directly at her ruined face. She saw the deeply judgmental, horrified expressions of the wealthy women she played tennis with and the powerful men her husband used to do business with. She raised her trembling hands, trying desperately to cover her face as the cold, harsh reality of her social ruin crashed down upon her. She was entirely finished. She would never be able to show her face in this city again without people whispering about the violent, trashy baby shower where her sons beat each other bloody over a shared grifter mistress. The heavy double doors of the ballroom burst open once again. A highly trained team of 4 burly country club security guards rushed into the room, followed closely by the panicked general manager. They sprinted toward the wreckage of the cake and the ruined champagne tower, grabbing the 2 bleeding, exhausted men and forcefully dragging them apart. Bradley was screaming, fighting wildly against the strong guards, trying to get one last hit in while Cameron lay gasping for air on the ruined floor, completely covered in white frosting and dark blood. In the far distance, the loud, piercing wail of police sirens began to echo clearly through the manicured country club grounds. Club management had called the local authorities the exact moment the physical violence began. While the entire ballroom descended into absolute pandemonium, my father and I had quietly stepped away from the epicenter of the chaos. We had moved gracefully to the far end of the room, taking up a comfortable residence at the long, polished mahogany bar. The bartender, a young man looking completely terrified by the vicious brawl, was staring wide-eyed at the center of the room. Harrison tapped his knuckles lightly against the smooth wooden bar, bringing the young man's attention back to us. 2 glasses of your absolute best vintage champagne. Please, my father, said his voice, a calm, steady anchor amidst the frantic screaming and the approaching sirens. The bartender nodded rapidly, grabbing a chilled bottle from the top shelf and pouring 2 pristine, bubbling glasses. He set them down respectfully in front of us, before quickly stepping back to watch the uniformed police officers rush into the ballroom with their heavy boots pounding and their radios squawking. I picked up my delicate glass and turned my back to the bar, leaning my elbows comfortably against the polished wood. I looked out over the sprawling ballroom, watching the bright flashing red and blue lights from the police cruisers reflect beautifully off the floor-to-ceiling windows. Uniformed officers were placing a struggling Bradley in heavy metal handcuffs to calm him down, while paramedics rushed in to check on Cameron's injuries. Beatrice was sobbing hysterically in the corner, trying desperately to hide her face from the relentless glare of her former friend's smartphone cameras. Monica was still sitting frozen in her velvet chair, completely ignored by absolutely everyone, crying genuine, terrifying tears now that she realized she was completely and entirely alone in the world. I raised my glass, slowly clinking the delicate crystal against my father's glass. A crisp, clear, beautiful chime rang out between us, cutting through the noise. We stood there in our impeccable custom-tailored clothing, sipping expensive cold champagne, and watching the people who had tried to destroy me completely eradicate their own existence. The air in the grand room was thick with the scent of ruined sugar, spilled alcohol, and absolute undeniable victory. I took a slow, satisfying sip of the bubbly champagne, letting the sweet taste linger on my tongue. The show today had been spectacular, but the final legal act was still waiting just over the horizon. 6 weeks later, the sparkling chandeliers and spilled vintage champagne of the country club were replaced by the harsh, aggressive fluorescent lighting of a sterile downtown legal conference room. We were seated around a massive frosted glass table for the official divorce deposition. I sat comfortably in a high-backed ergonomic chair, wearing a sharply tailored black power suit. My father sat to my right, organizing a neat stack of pristine manila folders. Across the wide glass table sat my husband and my mother-in-law. The contrast between our side of the table and theirs was staggering. Bradley looked absolutely terrible. The ongoing federal investigation had visibly aged him a decade in less than 2 months. Following the disastrous boardroom presentation, the federal authorities had raided his temporary apartment at dawn, confiscating every single piece of electronic hardware he owned. He was currently out on bail, facing incredibly serious federal indictments for corporate espionage and the unauthorized possession of classified Department of Defense data. His former software firm had completely disavowed him cooperating fully with the federal prosecutors to save their own corporate skins. Bradley was entirely unemployable, thoroughly disgraced, and rapidly drowning in mounting criminal defense fees. Beatrice was sitting right next to him, looking like a fragile, terrified ghost of her former high society self. The social fallout from the spectacular baby shower brawl had been absolute and merciless. She had been quietly but firmly asked to resign from every single elite charity board she served on. The women she had spent decades playing tennis with now crossed the street to avoid speaking to her. Because of their rapidly depleting funds, they had been forced to hire a cut-rate desperate divorce attorney named Leonard. Leonard wore a cheap, ill-fitting brown suit and carried an overflowing scuffed leather briefcase that looked like it had been dragged behind a car. He was sweating profusely, clearly intimidated by the sleek corporate surroundings of my father's elite downtown law firm. Despite his obvious terror and looming federal prison sentence, Bradley still possessed a delusional, staggering amount of arrogance. He glared at me across the glass table, his jaw set in a hard, bitter line. He genuinely believed that because we were married, he was legally entitled to ruin my life and take my wealth as a consolation prize for his own spectacular failures. Leonard cleared his throat nervously, opening a disorganized legal pad. He attempted to project an aura of commanding legal authority, but his voice cracked slightly on the very first syllable. Mr. Brooks Leonard began addressing my father while avoiding eye contact with me. My client is prepared to offer a highly reasonable settlement to finalize this dissolution of marriage efficiently. As we have recently uncovered through asset discovery, your daughter is the sole proprietor of a highly lucrative cybersecurity firm. Since this business was established and expanded during the duration of their legal marriage, it is indisputably considered a shared marital asset. Bradley sat up straighter, puffing out his chest and smirking at me. He thought he had just played a royal flush. He thought the $12 million federal contract I had recently signed was about to become his personal bailout fund. My client is demanding exactly 50% of the total valuation of the cybersecurity firm. Leonard continued gaining a fraction of false confidence. Furthermore, given that my client is currently facing unjustified unemployment and severe financial hardship, while your daughter brings in a massive multi-million-dollar revenue, we are formally requesting a permanent order of spousal support. We expect a monthly alimony payment sufficient to maintain the standard of living my client has grown accustomed to. I did not blink. I did not laugh. I simply turned my head and looked at my father. Harrison placed his hands flat on the frosted glass table. He looked at Leonard with an expression of profound clinical pity, usually reserved for a deeply confused child. Leonard, my father, said, his voice a rich, terrifyingly calm baritone. Did you take this divorce case on a contingency fee basis? Did my son-in-law promise to pay your legal fees using the hypothetical millions you just demanded? Leonard swallowed hard, a thick bead of sweat rolling down his temple. That is protected attorney-client privilege, Mr. Brooks. I simply expect a response to our settlement demands. Harrison let out a slow, deep chuckle. He reached into the pristine manila folder resting in front of him and pulled out a single, perfectly preserved legal document bound by a blue cover page. He slid the document across the smooth glass table until it bumped gently against Leonard's disorganized legal pad. I highly recommend you read page 4, section 7 of that document, Leonard, my father, instructed. Leonard picked up the document, his hands shaking slightly. Bradley leaned over, trying to read the dense legal print. What is this? Bradley demanded, his arrogant smirk finally beginning to falter. What did you just give him? That, Bradley, is an ironclad, fully executed post-nuptial agreement, I replied, my voice ringing like sharp-cut crystal in the quiet room. 5 years ago, when I officially incorporated my cybersecurity firm, I needed to legally separate my personal assets from my new corporate liabilities. I brought a stack of standard business registration paperwork home for you to sign. I told you it was just some boring administrative red tape required for my low-level computer repair job. Bradley stared at me, his eyes widening as the memory slowly surfaced in his panicked mind. You told me it was just tax liability waivers for your stupid help desk company. Bradley stammered, his voice rising in panic. You told me I just needed to sign it so the bank would leave us alone. And you signed it, I confirmed, offering him a cold, radiant smile. You signed every single page right where I placed the yellow sticky notes. You did not read a single word of that document, Bradley. You were far too busy watching a football game and complaining about how my boring paperwork was interrupting your evening. Because you thought my career was an absolute joke, you casually signed a bulletproof, legally binding post-nuptial agreement. Leonard flipped rapidly to page 4, his eyes darting frantically across the text. He audibly gasped, dropping the document back onto the table as if it had physically burned him. By signing that agreement, Bradley, My father explained, his tone dripping with lethal satisfaction. Action, you explicitly and permanently waived any and all rights to Isabella's current and future business assets, intellectual property, and corporate revenue. You completely severed yourself from her firm. You are legally entitled to absolutely 0% of her company. You will not see a single dime of her $12 million contract, and you will certainly never receive a single penny of spousal support. Bradley's face went completely chalk white. He looked at his lawyer, desperately seeking a loophole, but Leonard just stared blankly at the table, realizing he was never going to get paid for this case. The massive imaginary jackpot Bradley had been counting on to save him from federal ruin had just evaporated into thin air. "But we are not finished," Harrison said, withdrawing a second thick folder from his stack. My father opened the folder and spread a series of highly detailed forensic accounting spreadsheets across the center of the glass table. Next to the spreadsheets, he placed a certified copy of the property deed for the luxury waterfront townhouse. "While my daughter's corporate assets are legally protected," Harrison continued, "her personal savings are a different matter entirely. Forensic accounting has proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that you, Bradley, systematically embezzled hundreds of thousands of dollars from your joint marital savings accounts. You utilized those stolen funds as collateral to secretly purchase a luxury waterfront property for a third-party mistress." "That was my money too!" Bradley shouted, slamming his fist against the table in a sudden burst of panicked rage. "It was a joint account. I had the right to use it. You do not have the right to unilaterally drain a marital asset to secretly purchase real estate for a paramour," Harrison corrected sharply, his voice cracking like a whip. "That is classified as the deliberate dissipation of marital assets. It is financial fraud." My father turned his piercing gaze away from Bradley and locked eyes directly with my mother-in-law. Beatrice shrank back in her chair, looking absolutely terrified. "And you?" Beatrice Harrison said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, predatory register. "Your signature is right here on the deed as the official co-signer. You knowingly and willingly facilitated the embezzlement of my daughter's life savings. You actively participated in a conspiracy to defraud your own daughter-in-law to purchase real estate for your son's pregnant mistress." Beatrice gasped, clutching a hand to her chest. "I did not know," she stammered, her voice weak and trembling. "I did not know where the money came from. Bradley told me it was an investment property. He told me he just needed my credit score. Ignorance is not a valid legal defense." "Beatrice," I said, leaning forward, resting my elbows on the glass table. "You signed the legal documents. You are entirely complicit in the financial fraud." Harrison placed a final formal legal filing directly in the center of the table. "We are not just divorcing you," Bradley Harrison announced. "We are formally suing both you and your mother jointly in civil court for the immediate return of every single stolen cent, plus maximum punitive damages and all associated legal fees." The blood drained completely from Beatrice's face. She looked at the lawsuit, her eyes wide with absolute mounting horror. "I do not have that kind of cash lying around," Beatrice whispered, her voice breaking into a terrified sob. "I cannot pay that back." "Then I highly suggest you put your precious suburban estate on the market this afternoon." "Beatrice," I said, my voice entirely devoid of pity. "Because if you do not voluntarily liquidate your assets to pay me back every single dime you stole, my father will take your house, your cars, and your entire country club retirement fund in civil court before the federal prosecutors even get a chance to put your son in an orange jumpsuit." Bradley buried his face in his hands, letting out a loud, broken sob. Beatrice openly wept beside him, mourning the absolute permanent destruction of her wealthy, untouchable life. They were completely cornered, entirely bankrupted, and facing total societal and legal ruin. I sat back in my ergonomic chair, watching them drown in the spectacular consequences of their own toxic arrogance. I had warned Bradley that he was making a catastrophic mistake. He just never realized that the quiet woman he thought he could casually step on was the exact same woman who would effortlessly burn his entire world to the ground. The deposition concluded with the pathetic sound of Bradley sobbing into his hands, while Beatrice sat paralyzed beside him. They stumbled out of that sterile downtown conference room completely broken and entirely aware that their reign of arrogant terror was permanently over. They had walked in expecting to secure a multi-million-dollar settlement and walked out facing absolute inescapable annihilation. The fallout over the next several weeks was swift, brutal, and incredibly satisfying to watch from a safe distance. The federal government does not move slowly when dealing with the theft of classified Department of Defense data. Bradley's federal arraignment was a media spectacle. His former software company completely threw him to the wolves, turning over every single piece of security footage, internal network logs, and communication records the federal agents requested. The digital watermarks I had embedded in the honeypot database provided an airtight, irrefutable chain of evidence leading directly to Bradley's unauthorized flash drive. His cut-rate defense attorney advised him to take a plea deal, but the federal prosecutors were not interested in leniency. Bradley's official trial date was set on the federal docket, and his conviction was an absolute guarantee. He was looking at 10 to 15 years in a federal penitentiary for corporate espionage and the reckless mishandling of classified government intelligence. Stripped of his passport, drained of his finances, and publicly disgraced, Bradley was forced to move into a tiny, miserable studio apartment on the wrong side of the city while awaiting his inevitable prison sentence. Cameron fared no better. Without the $150,000 loan, Beatrice had tried to force me to co-sign his grand vision for a fusion bistro, instantly evaporated. The commercial lease in the arts district fell through. When news of the family's catastrophic legal and financial ruin spread through the local business community, Cameron's existing creditors aggressively descended upon him. They seized his car, his remaining business assets, and drained whatever meager funds he had hidden away. Monica, true to her opportunistic nature, took one look at the sinking ship and immediately secured a life raft. The second she realized the luxury waterfront townhouse was being seized, the bank accounts were frozen, and the golden boy brother was entirely bankrupt, she packed her bags. She did not leave a note. She simply vanished into the city, abandoning Cameron to face his crushing debt and his spectacular public humiliation entirely alone. But the most poetically just downfall belonged to my former mother-in-law. Beatrice had spent her entire adult life constructing an identity based purely on perceived wealth, social superiority, and the ruthless judgment of others. My civil lawsuit for the embezzled marital funds struck her where it hurt the absolute most. Facing the terrifying reality of having her assets forcibly seized by court order, Beatrice was left with no choice but to voluntarily liquidate everything she owned to satisfy the staggering debt she owed me. She placed her massive, sprawling, suburban brick colonial estate on the market. Because she needed the capital immediately to avoid further legal penalties, she was forced to sell the property for significantly under market value. I made sure to drive past her neighborhood on the day the moving trucks arrived. I parked my car down the street and watched as Beatrice directed the movers, her face pale and drawn. She was no longer wearing her designer silk blouses or her signature pearls. She looked exhausted and utterly defeated. The women from her elite country club, the same women who had eagerly filmed the violent baby shower brawl, drove slowly past the estate in their luxury cars. They did not stop to help her. They did not offer their condolences. They simply watched her social exile with cold, judgmental curiosity before driving away. Beatrice was permanently banned from high society, forced to move into a small, rundown condominium on the outskirts of the city, using the tiny fraction of funds she had left after paying my legal settlement and covering her son's mounting criminal defense fees. Her precious family legacy was completely reduced to ash. 6 months later, the suffocating drama of the Henderson family felt like a distant, fading memory. I was no longer the quiet, unassuming wife walking on eggshells to appease a man who deeply resented my existence. I had shed that identity completely. The afternoon sun blazed bright and warm against my skin. The sharp, salty scent of the ocean filled the air, completely replacing the stifling smell of Beatrice's roasted garlic and expensive perfume. I was standing on the polished teak deck of a stunning multi-million-dollar private yacht cutting smoothly through the deep, crystal blue waters off the coast. The yacht belonged to a close corporate associate of my father, but for the weekend we had the entire vessel entirely to ourselves. I was wearing a flowing white silk resort dress, the fabric catching the warm ocean breeze. I leaned against the gleaming silver railing of the yacht, watching the white foam crest against the hull as we sailed further away from the mainland. The sheer vastness of the ocean stretching out in front of me was intoxicating. It was the physical manifestation of pure, unrestricted freedom. Harrison stepped out from the main cabin and walked across the deck, joining me at the railing. He was dressed comfortably in a light linen shirt and sunglasses, looking more relaxed than I had seen him in years. He carried two delicate crystal flutes filled with perfectly chilled vintage champagne. He handed me a glass and offered a warm, incredibly proud smile. "To new horizons, Isabella," my father said, raising his glass into the sunlight. I smiled back, raising my crystal flute to meet his. "To outsmarting the people who thought we were blind," I replied softly. The delicate chime of our glasses clinking together was a beautiful, victorious sound. I took a slow, satisfying sip of the cold champagne, letting the crisp bubbles dance across my tongue. We stood there in a comfortable, quiet companionship, simply enjoying the gentle rocking of the yacht and the warmth of the afternoon sun. Suddenly, a sharp, distinct ping echoed from the small clutch resting on the deck table beside me. I set my champagne glass down and picked up my phone, unlocking the screen. The notification was a highly secure encrypted email from the lead operations director at my cybersecurity firm. I opened the message and read the bold text flashing across the screen. The international expansion contract had been officially finalized and signed. My firm had just successfully closed a staggering multi-year deal to provide elite vulnerability testing for a coalition of European banking institutions. The revenue from this single contract would effectively double the overall valuation of my company. My business was no longer just a domestic powerhouse. I was officially taking my empire global. I let out a bright, genuine laugh, the sound carrying over the rush of the ocean waves. "Good news?" my father asked, leaning against the railing and watching my reaction. "The best news," I confirmed, locking my phone and setting it back on the table. "We just closed the European banking contract, Dad. The firm is officially expanding internationally by next quarter." Harrison beamed with absolute pride, shaking his head in sheer admiration. "You built a fortress, Isabella," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You built an entire empire from the ground up while those fools treated you like you were nothing. They never had any idea who they were truly dealing with." "No, they did not," I agreed, my voice steady and calm. "And that was their most fatal mistake." I reached my right hand deep into the silk pocket of my white dress. My fingers brushed against a small, cold circle of heavy metal. I pulled my hand out of my pocket and opened my palm, letting the bright sunlight catch the object resting against my skin. It was my old diamond wedding ring. I stared at the sparkling stone for a long, quiet moment. I thought about the woman I used to be when Bradley had first placed it on my finger. I thought about the years I had spent shrinking myself, deliberately hiding my brilliance and suppressing my ambition, just to make a mediocre man feel important. I thought about the Sunday dinners where I sat silently absorbing Beatrice's vicious insults simply to maintain a toxic illusion of peace. That woman was entirely gone. She had been completely eradicated the moment I saw Bradley kissing Monica at the airport baggage claim. I did not feel a single ounce of sadness or regret. The ring was no longer a symbol of love or commitment. It was a heavy, useless shackle from a life I had spectacularly outgrown. Without a single second thought, I pinched the diamond ring between my thumb and index finger. I pulled my arm back and tossed the heavy metal directly over the silver railing of the yacht. The diamond caught the bright sunlight one final time, sparkling like a tiny dying star as it arced through the open air. I watched it hit the surface of the deep blue water with a tiny, insignificant splash, instantly sinking into the dark, freezing depths of the ocean where it belonged. I turned my back to the water and faced the open horizon. I closed my eyes, taking a deep, slow breath of the sweet, quiet ocean air. I felt the warm sun radiating against my face. The heavy, suffocating weight of my past was permanently buried, and my future was a wide-open sky. I had protected my legacy, completely destroyed my enemies, and secured an empire. I opened my eyes and looked out at the limitless horizon, breathing in the absolute, intoxicating reality of complete freedom and flawless, undisputed victory.